Great conversations with wonderful people. Today is going to be no different. And so we're excited to jump into that here shortly. Dr. J, welcome once again to the Corral Call. How are you today?
I'm doing fabulous. I love these corral calls. I say it all the time, but I'm serious. The depth of the individuals that we have on these corral calls is amazing. You never know what you're going to get. You may get some big government official. You may get someone who is leadership focused. I'm always excited. So let's get into it.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, today is no different and an exciting and wonderful guest. And that's why we want to introduce Mr. Joseph Kohm III. He is not the first, but it is the third. And so the third time's a charm, right, Joseph?
Not really, because I'm just trying to live up to senior and junior, if I'm being honest. I have an incredible legacy that I inherited with my name. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll get a little bit to know about that because we do want to get to know you a bit and for to be 100% open to everybody. Joseph and I go to church together. Been at the same church for a long time, but just recently had a chance to kind of chat and get to know a little bit more about each other. But he's been doing some amazing things with the Family Policy Alliance. He is a vice president of now. And you told me he was a vice president. Now I'm losing the last part of it.
Vice President of Public Policy.
Public policy. So that sounds super important, and we're going to get into that here shortly. And but yeah, Joseph, give us a little bit of your background. Like I said, you're the third. Your parents and your dad, your granddad, obviously been doing some cool stuff too. So just give us a little bit of your bio. That'd be great.
Sure, Mark. I want to start by just honoring you and Dr. J. It's such a huge treat to be on here with this corral call with you both. What you have going here is such a great ministry and a great tool and an encouraging tool that I've seen just from the outside. So it's an honor to be on the inside and supporting you both with us. So thank you for having me. My name is Joseph Kohm III. Like I said, my dad is junior, my grandpa is senior. I serve as the vice president of public policy at Family Policy Alliance and Family Policy Alliance Foundation, which is a nationwide ministry. We're C3 and C4 nonprofit. We were founded by Dr. James Dobson. Some of your listeners and the people in the call might know him, founded, among other things, Focus on the Family. So we were originally a part of Focus. Dr. Jobson founded us around the turn of the century under a different name, with the idea being that we would be Focus's policy activist and grassroots wing to reflect biblical values with the connections to Focus on the Family. So when Dr. Dobson retired, most of Focus's structure became independent. So they had a bunch of sub ministries as part of Focus on the Family, including what's now known as FBA. So when he retired, we became our own C3, C4 nonprofit, which was so much better for us and all the other groups in the wake of Dr. Dobson's career, because it allowed us to cultivate our own ministry partners and be totally independent for the vision God had put specifically on Family Policy Alliance. I joined the team back in 2021. Just briefly leading up to that in my life, I was born in central New York in a little town called Ithaca, where Cornell University is. That's where my dad's side of the family is from, all the way back to when they immigrated over from Ireland during the potato famine. Same with my mom's family. They are Irish and Scottish immigrants from the Albany area. My parents met at Syracuse University. Dad was playing basketball for Coach Jim Boeheim, and my mom was in law school. They got married, moved back to Ithaca. 5 years later, God calls my dad to law school as well, but this time at Regent University School of Law here in Virginia Beach, as Mark knows well, which is the world's preeminent Christian law school. So my dad became class of 96, and we have stayed here ever since. My mom's the family law professor there. My dad is, they're both obviously both also attorneys, as am I. My dad was a baseball player agent for a number of years, and now he's a priest in an Anglican denomination. So he went to his MDiv at Regent too. But so I grew up here. I was homeschooled till ninth grade. Then, because Regent or Virginia, this as a state, didn't have what's called a Tim Tebow law at the time, meaning you could stay homeschooled and still play in your local public athletics department for your local school that you were districted to. I had to go to high school, so I went to Salem High School here for 4 years. Then I went to Virginia Military Institute for college, which is out in Lexington, Virginia, another middle of nowhere town. Came back for law school after that at Regent also. So I'm class of 2017 from Regent Law, followed in my mom and dad's legacy, which I was honored to. I owed the Army some active duty time after that, thanks to my VMI education. So went on active duty in 2017. I served for about 4 years as an officer in the 10th Mountain Division, Light Infantry, which is in Fort Drum, New York, or mostly in Fort Drum. I was technically field artillery classification, but we were all when you join a light infantry division, you're all infantry one way or another. So I left that in 2021. A couple months later, I came to work for FPA. I started as the director of public policy, and this year I became the vice president. So I've been very fortunate to be able to sew into FPA as a ministry. It's a true honor because we have not just national, but now we're having global influence with a lot of our issue areas. And maybe we can get into that at some point during this call,
Yeah.
Mark. But that was a little bit longer than I hoped for, but that's pretty much my background and at least where I work at for now.
Yeah. Another fun fact about Joseph is that he actually played baseball at Salem with my cousin's son, which is something we found out a few weeks
That's
ago.
correct.
Kind of crazy. Also, the same school both of my older daughters graduated from. So,
And
there
I've been able to encourage them too, Mark, because they're both in the Performing Arts Academy, as was I at Salem. So
you
that
go.
was the beginning of my artistic education, which came to fruition at VMI, where I was an English major. So Salem's a great school, and kids like yours are a light there, Mark. So thanks.
Yeah, yeah, it's been cool to see. They're at Region. I guess they're following the Joseph Cohn III success
Well, well,
pattern.
Well, I'll tell you what, the undergrad school there, the College of Arts and Sciences, has just grown and just tremendously. It's been so satisfying to see, Mark, because I remember as a homeschool kid walking to the Regent, Robertson Hall, where all the classes and my mom's office was, when nothing existed except that in the law library. Like none of the student center, communication school, the dorms, none of that was there.
Hmm.
And there certainly wasn't a College of Arts and Sciences. So Regent wasn't an option for me for college growing up. So now to have seen how the university has expanded and expanded into excellence is truly impressive. And your kids are markers of that, Mark, that they are there. I mean, they're going to have an incredible education. I think they're going to grow spiritually there. Hopefully, they're having a good experience. But every undergrad student I know, and I've employed some of them as interns at FPA, just really, really impressive young people following after Christ and his call in their lives.
That's awesome. That is so good. Joseph, you've had the opportunity to share a couple times, if not more, with the Wave Church, which is our home church, and just educating the people to what's going on with policy. Obviously, that's in the name, family policy. And so a couple times I've been able to hear you, and it's always been very informative and empowering for parents. And is that kind of the centrality of what you guys are doing, trying to equip families and parents to know what's really going on and how to get involved?
That's a big part of it. So you mentioned, like you said, policy is one third of our name. So we have a policy portfolio of issue areas that we work on, which is just fancy speak to say I engage on all the hot button issues in the political sphere that nobody wants to discuss at dinner tables with friends. Nobody wants to talk about abortion or transgender issues or men and girls sports. Nobody wants to talk about legalized marijuana or predatory gambling. Those are all what we would call pro family issues because they most profoundly and directly affect the family and God's design for it. So those are the subjects that we work on at FPA essentially from the policy and public messaging angles. So I have a weekly podcast. This is kind of my setup for it. That's an aspect of my job to try to inform people from a family biblical perspective about what's going on in the government, both federally and in their state. But the other two thirds of our name is family and alliance. So I've told you the family part because we are here for God's design, for the family, for biblical values, and then even broader than that, what we would call social conservative values, which are biblical values. And then our third part of our name is alliance. So we consider ourselves the primary premier convener of social conservative allied organizations. They could be Christian, they could be conservative, or they could just agree with us on one or more of our issues, but we like to convene them because that makes you, in our view, social conservative. So we do that in a number of ways. We have a conference every year where we convene those. We also have a training academy for legislators at all levels of government. So we have our Statesman Academy, which trains elected state legislators in their state houses to receive biblical worldview training and then go back and implement that in their work as legislators in the state house. And they've become very productive and impressive members of our alumni community who they end up being a lot of sponsors and shepherds for legislation we support in the states. We also have a training program called our School Board Academy. This is for school board members who are Christians or conservatives. They want to know how to be better, more effective for those values in their school boards. So if anyone listening is on a school board or considering running for it or want to, I can't recommend the School Board Academy enough. I get to teach the class on LGBT issues for that. You can find that on our website. We put several classes through. It's a great program. And the last main way that we have our influence through alliances is with this network alliance of 40 state family policy councils, or FPCs. These are C3, C4 nonprofit Christian ministries like FPA. They work on generally the same issue set, but they do it specifically in their state houses. So, Mark, you and I are here in Virginia, for example. The Virginia Family Policy Council is called Virginia Family Foundation. They're led by an incredible lawyer and advocate named Victoria Cobb. They have a robust group of lobbyists and grassroots organizers, including a church ambassador network. And they also have a legal center that can represent clients pro bono who have been the victim of religious discrimination or some kind of family custody violation over an ideological issue. Most of the FPCs look like that with varying degrees of robustness and capabilities, but there's about 40 of them. And we have one overseas in New Zealand as well. So we'd like to see one in all 50 states and then it continue to expand globally, particularly in Western Europe. So through that convening of state allies, that's where our influence is really felt across the country and in the federal government for these biblical values.
Yeah, I love that, Dr. J. I love the alliance, the people of God coming together to really see his impact. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm absolutely loving it. You touched on so many different things that I'm sure probably went over most of our listeners' heads, and to help them out, I'm sure all of us have heard about the separation of church and state, and people even believe that politics and Christianity doesn't mix and that type of thing. And I'm really setting you up to hit a home run here because I'm really interested on what you have to say on this. But concerning politics and the fact that politics has become such an ugly word, could you elaborate on why it's so important? Like, first of all, what is politics? First of all, we have ideas of what we think it is, but what's politics, number one? And why is it so important that we as Christians be involved in what actually happens in our nation and our government, wherever we live?
Yeah, great question, Dr. J. I'm going to do my best to hit that home run or at least a double for you. You are right. Politics has become awfully contentious these days, and one of those things that, I think for very good reason makes people a bit nauseous. You don't want to sit down at the dinner table and talk about these things because, we're unfortunately, I think, a very tragic flashpoint in American political history. At the time of recording, this is late October 2025. So a few weeks ago, you've seen multiple acts of political violence in America. And that's sad because that's not who we are. So I don't blame reasonable people who see that and see the ugliness and the mudslinging. And their first instinct is, I don't want to be a part of that. I mean, I don't blame you. I don't want to be a part of that either. That first and foremost is at FPA, we just see ourselves as servants of the kingdom of God who are called on a specific mission. That said, so we are called to engage really nuts and bolts in this in the political atmosphere. So hopefully most people don't have to. But I think its baseline fact is politics. You may be put off by it, and I think that's reasonable. But politics should matter to you because they matter to Jesus. I think they matter to God throughout the whole Bible. Every aspect of the civic process you see God caring about, and Jesus reaffirming, and then the apostles throughout the rest of the New Testament agreeing with. So I would define, to start with where you ended there, Dr. J. Politics is defined as, in my mind, the civic process. And that's not just relegated to America. Every country has their own civic process with varying degrees of functionality. And I don't leave America out here. We're not the most functional of political bodies, but I think we are one of the better ones in the world, which just tells you how difficult politics is in a broken world. Governing is hard. This is why the people of Israel, their first instinct was, we just want a king. We just want to be like everybody else. And God was trying to tell them, I have better plans for you than that. I am the only perfect king. I have something better for you. They're like, nope, we just want to be like everybody else. We just want to make this easy. Just give us somebody to rule us. Isn't that the sin instinct? I feel like, at least that it's
Mhm.
corrupted now. I mean, before the garden, God was still king. He still ruled over Adam and Eve. So the desire for governance is an inherently good one because
Mhm.
we're creatures. We're not the creator. We were created to serve, to obey, to do what God has put on our hearts to do. So the civic process, unfortunately, is a necessary part of being human. None of us are God, so we're never going to get it right until Jesus returns, I feel like. That said, politics are important because they're important to Christ, and that's mostly because they're important to vulnerable people, but they do affect everyone. So, especially the family, which is where I come in. We work on behalf mostly of family values, though other biblical values too. But the family's under particular threat by the devil throughout the entirety of human existence. Even early on in the Old Testament, he corrupted the family through polygamy, which, I hear constantly the objection to Christianity of, oh, you're just polygamists. The Old Testament's full of people with multiple wives. I'm like, yeah, how'd that work out for them?
Yeah.
Like, you won't find a single positive example of polygamy actually being good for anyone involved in it in the Old Testament because it was a perversion of God's original intention for a family, which is a mother and a father, a biological man and a biological woman joined together in a covenant vow to God, and then their children, whether that's biological or adopted. That's God's design for the family. And because it's God's design, it's his way of filling and ruling the earth through us. It has always been in the devil's crosshairs more than I would argue pretty much any other institution God created. Starts with marriage and then it gets into custody over kids. The devil targets those things as best he can. And at FPA and the people that we work with, we exist to defend that, to uphold it, to protect it, and to try to create a world in which it can flourish. So, one of our mission statements is a nation where God is honored, families thrive, and life is cherished. That's what we want to see with our work. So, if you care about those things, and I would submit that every Christian should, every person who calls themselves a Christian should care about those things, then God has some kind of role for you to play in the civic process. Jesus says, render to Caesar's what's his. That's a call for Christians to be the best citizens possible in whatever society they're in. And sometimes that looks like doing extraordinary things that are not socially acceptable, like in the early church would rescue infants who were abandoned by their parents because they were maybe a baby girl or because they had a deformity. Christians rescued those babies and raised them as their own. That's them being the best possible citizens. And God has things like that for Christians to do at every point in history.
Wow. I have one follow-up question to that.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like the B part. Um, I think when you talk about hot button issues, people just being uncomfortable with politics, there's this other side of it, which I'd love for you to speak to because you're in the trenches of it, is the wheels of justice, the law tend to turn so slowly, and people just start to feel like my vote doesn't matter, nothing that I do matters, that type of thing. So, could you speak to there is a process, and regardless of how we feel about that process, we all have some type of role to play. But can you just give us a little bit of more insight into that process from starting wherever it is that you're starting with this particular issue to actually hopefully creating an army of individuals or whatever to where it's something actually that's actionable, that's actually making some type of impact. And then to that also, what can we do if we're not somebody that's going to be boots on the ground? What can we do to support?
Yeah, because a great question. I'll start with the vision, then get to some specific tools because at FPA we're not just about concepts and visions and biblical interpretation. We have like practical tools for you and people you can reach out to help you take the first steps to get involved. So FPA has a sister ministry called Christians Engaged, who we merged with last year, which is led by a woman named Bunny Pounds, and they're doing incredible work on exactly this topic, which is to get Christians engaged in this process. So what does that look like? There are three main aspects of that vision: are pray, vote, engage. So that starts with in your private life and in your family life, praying about our country, about the issues that are going on, and just about how the church should engage in it. Pray for your leaders. Pray that the Christians would have the courage to fulfill their generational vocation of speaking truth to power. Engage in the civic process. This is talking to people, um, educating yourself. Again, I'll give you some practical tools about that, and then voting your values. Social conservatives and biblical people with biblical values are the largest voting bloc in America by far. It's not remotely close. So the question next is, well, why don't we win it? Why don't people with our values win every election, right? This is why, because people are not praying, voting, and engaging. So we exist to see that happen. To people who think your voice doesn't matter, I would say I don't think that's an unreasonable way for you to feel in today's world, because there are forces that oppose God that have a vested interest in making you feel that way. And there are definitely maybe parts of the world and maybe even some parts of this country where your voice does have less value than it should, even by our own political systems. Forget the dignity that you've inherited as being made in the image of God. Just by being an American, your voice has a certain level of value, or at least it should. And one of the things we work for at FBA is to make sure we always have free and fair elections. Everybody's vote counts. But I'll just tell a quick story to illustrate how good we do have it in America, which is when I was in law school, Regent University had a program, and they still have this program called the Center for Global Justice. And it would send young law students out on internships around the world on human rights work that our donors at Regent Law supported. So I was fortunate enough to be selected for one of these. I went to serve an anti-human trafficking legal internship in Jakarta, Indonesia, which was a watershed moment in my life. And while there, I'm of course talking with my fellow interns and some of the ones closer to that part of the world in India. And I had one of my classmates who was a much better lawyer than me was serving in that position, and she told me, we it's very reasonable to complain about how long the system takes. If you have to go to court for an action or something just to get justice for what you deserve, it can take forever, right? Take years on end. There's going to be endless appeals. This is where the term lawfare comes from, that we're seeing a lot more in America of them in American politics. But this friend of mine from my law school class, she's serving as an intern in India, and she has a client who is a landowner who's just trying to get a basic recoupment action for an adjoining plot of his land. Right, all the facts were in his side. Should have been open and closed. At least it would have been if it were here. This man had actually inherited this action from his father, the previous landlord, because they were on year number 18 of this action.
Oh.
That's how long it was taking Indian court system. Now, this is not to rag on India. They're a growing country, and I think this was not a unique case. But the point is, that's much more the norm in what we would call the developing world. Who was it? Churchill, who said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. Like, he's kind of onto something there. There was a guy who loved his king, the king who had been divested of most of his political power. But the point is, this is the nature of governing in a fallen world. Is this stuff doesn't always work the way it should. Now we have a calling on God to try to make it work better the way it should, to better affirm everybody's dignity is made in the image of God. But I say that story to say we have it pretty good in America. Like, yes, our system is wrong. Yes, there's a lot of injustice. There are a lot of problems. We are so blessed that we didn't choose to be born into America. God decided you will be born into America at this point in time. We live with running water, with electricity, with LED screens that I'm looking at you two with right now. So when I hear people complain about this, I wanted to first affirm your instinct, because it means you're listening to the voice of God saying things aren't as they should be. But since you are so fortunate and privileged to have been born in America, it means we have this extra duty to take the time to be involved in these things, to care about it, and to try to make it work better, to make a positive difference in everybody's lives. So I say that it's just an instructive story. And I'll just finish with this answer that was longer than I hoped, with just a couple of practical resources to help people get involved. First of all, my friends and colleagues at Christians Engaged, Google them. They are awesome. They have training programs all laid out for this, including for young adults too. So they have a young adults program called CE 1630, Christians Engaged 1630. That's their young adults program. My friend Abby is their young adults director. She runs all their programs and their podcasts. Christians Engaged has on ramps to civic engagement to help people with that practically nationally. Then the next thing I would suggest is get in contact with your state family policy counselor, who I mentioned earlier. If you go to our website, familypolicyalliance.com, top right corner is a tab called Allies. Every state FPC is listed there, every one with contact information, the name of their president or executive director. Each one of them has programs to help you get involved in the issues that matter to your state. Because one of the biblical principles of governance that we just can never avoid is that local governance, the closer the governance is to you, always has more of an impact on your life than broader governments, like the federal government. You turn on CNN or Fox News, all they're going to talk about is President Trump and Congress and the government shutdown. And that stuff all does matter. But your local government and your state government has way more of an impact on your day-to-day life than the federal government or President Trump will ever have. And the state family policy councils can help you understand what's important to your state and get involved in the process, especially through their church ambassador, networks. So I've rambled on a lot. I apologize for that, but this is especially important in that multiple states have off-year elections this year, including ours, Mark, in Virginia.
That's
New
right.
Jersey, downtown New York City has an election for mayor. This is important every year for people. So I wanted to make sure I left with some practical tools.
Yeah, 100%. And I know you touched on it earlier about Jesus cares about government and politics, and I think that can be highlighted by the actual word that he chose to use for what we know as church, which was ecclesia. And for those that maybe have studied a little bit, you would realize it wasn't a churchy term or a temple term if you were living in the time, because it was actually a term, to my knowledge, that was being used by the Roman government for a council of people to come together and talk about, the things that affected them at the time. So it was probably controversial for him to start talking about the ecclesia in the time and the season that he was in, but it was strategic, right? Because it wasn't about just coming together as a group of people and singing some cool songs and whatnot, but it was about affecting change for community and beyond. And they people knew that's what the ecclesia was meant to do.
That strategic term is real, or aspect of that definition, Mark, is so important because it shows that here, we spent the first part of this call encouraging people to get involved and to make their voice heard. Well, part of the stewardship burden that we have inherited as ecclesia is to do that in the best, most effective way to maximize your voice's effectiveness. That's where the strategic aspect of this comes in. Is everybody can hop on Instagram and do a story about something that's important to them. And I'm not saying don't do that. What I am saying is if you decide you're going to get involved, and I think every Christian has a role to play, as part of your stewardship duty is to go about that in the way that's going to give you the most effect. And that's where people like me are here to serve people. Is we are in this all the time. We work very hard to make sure we don't lose our perspective, and we want to help people get involved in this. Use us for that. We can make this at least grease the skids for you and have to maximize your voice tonight, or just in generally. I mentioned tonight because I'm doing an event with Turning Point USA tonight, and this is one thing I'm going to encourage the young people for is, it's everybody can post a Snapchat or go hand out flyers at the voting booth. I'm not saying don't do that, but part of being a Christian at least is that additional level of stewardship that involves strategically thinking, how can I do this best? And there are Christians that exist to help you with that. This is our calling from God. It's me at FPA, it's my friends at the state family policy councils, and it's my colleagues at Christians Engaged.
Awesome. I'm glad you mentioned that thing for tonight because I was going to get to the point of the Charlie Kirk effect.
Yeah.
And I saw that you had a thing, but I didn't realize it was Turning Point. So perfect segue, Joseph. So when I saw you the other day at church, it was obviously after what had happened with Charlie Kirk. And I was like, well, I think it'll be timely because it's given us time to kind of see what's happened and from your perspective, kind of learn what's been going on after that tragedy. And of course, it looks like tonight, you'll be able to, be engaged in something specific to that. But kind of give us what the lay of the land has been. We've heard testimonies of like, kind of revival type things happening. But as far as what you guys are involved with, what are you seeing?
Yeah, great question. So that was probably the worst day of this job for that I've had with FPA for a little over 4 years, was the day that we all watched Charlie Kirk be murdered live on TV, or on TikTok or whatever, for his faith and for the political beliefs that they led him to. Because one of the disappointing things we've seen in the aftermath of his martyrdom is a lot of people who call themselves Christians trying to say that he wasn't one of us, or that he wasn't killed for his faith, or that the things he said and did and believed in were not biblical things. But these people never cite any explicit examples. They're usually often under a lot of pressure to just virtue signal, be very gracious, like, oh, he just wasn't a biblical person. He was rude or he was mean. They don't cite any specific examples. Whereas I can cite, example after example of times where Charlie Kirk was passionate in his arguments, but he was never disrespectful, which is, of course, a biblical tenet, right? We respect everyone, even if we don't necessarily respect some of the beliefs they hold or the things they do, because God doesn't always respect them because they're people made in the image of God. Charlie Kirk always did that. And that's what I think broke a lot of people about Charlie, is that he was this incredible, I want to say almost forgotten blend of passion and respect. Because we live in a world now where if you disagree with someone at all, you are disrespecting them. If you don't affirm every aspect of their life, you must not love them. You must actively hate them. Charlie Kirk so carefully balanced passion and respect that it just didn't compute for people who've been raised in a world where if you disagree with them at all, you must, have it out for them or something. And I think his martyrdom is a tragic response to that. This person couldn't compute this in his mind, and it led him to commit violence against Charlie Kirk. So that's kind of the negative side we've seen is in reaction to that. There's a lot of positives too, but I do want to just make clear it's not been all sunshine and rainbows since this happened to Charlie Kirk. And yes, a lot of people who call themselves Christians have, in my regard, just in my opinion, just failed. I'm not going to name any names here out of respect, but they've just failed. They're not doing their respectful duty to a dead man, and they're not doing their intellectual duty of if you're going to criticize a man when he's no longer here to defend himself, at least bring the receipts. You're not doing that. So that's out there, and we've seen no tempering of the kind of rhetoric or behavior that led to Charlie's death, and I see that I'm very disappointed in that personally. In fact, at the time of recording today, October 28th, if you don't mind me mentioning the date, there's going to be a hearing later on Capitol Hill where they talk about political violence and the rise of it in America. And the pitch, unfortunately, because it's a Republican-led commission, so people's views of it are going to be a little biased. Um, the pitch is going to be this is mostly a left-wing phenomenon, and I do agree with that conclusion. I think there's going to be acknowledgments of where it has cropped up on the right too. You think of January 6th, and there's a lot of opinions out there about that. I'm not trying to relitigate that, but I think undoubtedly, at least the last few years, the rise has been of political violence has been entirely from the left. We've seen no tamping down of the rhetoric that has led to that. The time of recording, there's a candidate called Zohran Mamdani running for mayor of New York. And this is a man who's an open jihadist. He's open about that. Like he is a Marxist too, but he's a jihadist. And he's just a couple of days ago, the latest scandal with him broke of him palling around with unindicted co-conspirators of the World Trade Center bombing in the 1990s. No hits to his polling, nothing. And what that tells you is because someone can get away with that in today's political spectrum on one side of the aisle means there's an incentive structure that has been created whereby just the cultural vibe now is if you disagree with someone, you hate them, you wish them dead. So that's what leads people to say, well, if they disagree with me, they wish me dead, maybe I should kill them first. Unfortunately, that's the America we're living in right now. And this is where I think the opportunity exists for Christians and where the positive news comes in. Because I think, Mark, you've probably seen just at our church the last few weeks, we've seen a boost in attendance. And if you look at measurables around the country, people are going back to church in a little bit higher numbers. Bible sales are up. Christian music has risen even on the charts. So we're seeing a lot of at least renewed thinking about life and death. What's encouraged me the most is the move among young people, and this is the positive thing that I'll wrap up this diatribe with. Is I was just talking to a friend of mine who's the campus ministries director at Regent, and he was telling me about all the kids who had come to him for counseling in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, which is the least surprising thing I've ever heard because Charlie was just so influential to younger people, and for many of them, that's the first even remote experience of death they've ever had. I served in the military. Death is not exactly a stranger for me, at least in a tertiary way, dealing with friends of mine and friends of friends who have passed away. But for a lot of kids, this is their first experience of the reality of death, right? We're all told we're going to live forever until this happens. You see somebody who, even if you disagreed, you knew through and through, who seemed invincible. And the response you're seeing among young people, yes, a lot of them are going back to church. A lot of them are getting more involved. I'm sure I'm going to see that at the Turning Point event tonight. But one thing I've seen that's been so encouraging, because it's a mark of growth from one generation to the next. What I'm about to describe, I did not learn intuitively. Someone had to tell me this. But what I'm seeing amongst these younger generations is they are intuitively realizing that to be the kind of person God's calling you to be, you have to take the initiative to try to become that person. And this is most clear in the response to Charlie's death from his wife, Erica Kirk, who, in my opinion, has just been an unbelievable rock of a human being coming off of this. Like, even if you disagree with her on a lot of things, fine. What you can't deny is her courage, her strength, and the fact that her husband had left her and their kids with such a clear vision for God's calling on their family that she could pick it up and run with it. The speech she made just 48 hours after he died was incredible. Then her speech at his memorial service in Phoenix was jaw dropping, where she forgave her husband's killer to the entire world. First of all, it's an incredible example of what a Christian is called to do, but also it's an example to these young people. And I'm sure, Mark, you know enough young people to know, like for at least, especially for Christians, the dating scene feels like a disaster right now, right? It feels very hard for young Christians to find people who share their values and be with. And a lot of them, I think, are settling, and because of this, they just feel discouraged. But in the wake of what we saw with Charlie and the way Erica has represented him and his legacy, his vision, as become the leader of Turning Point in the aftermath, I'm seeing young people realizing that they want to marry somebody like that. Not just that, I think that's intuitive. Anybody could see all this and think, I want to marry somebody like that. But what's not intuitive that's so encouraging is that they're realizing that if I'm going to marry somebody like that, I have to become somebody like that. You have to become the kind of person you want to attract. Somebody had to tell me that. I knew that I wanted to marry somebody I respected and was impressive and all that. But somebody had to tell me, well, if that's what you want to attract, you should make some choices in your life to try to become someone like that. Kids are realizing this on their own in the wake of Charlie's passing and his martyrdom. In fact, just the other day, a colleague I work with, as a 16-year-old, she came home when Erica Kirk was on the television, and she just remarked casually to her mom, I really want to find my Charlie. I guess that means I have to be an Erica. Like, kids are intuitively coming to this. And that, I think, is a really positive thing in the young people, that hoping we'll see Charlie Kirk's ultimate vision, by his own words, of renewing the American family and restoring it. I think that's step one, is kids realizing the kind of people they need to become.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the cool thing about it is, while that realization, that's a gift from God, because it ultimately comes from God to be able to do that, right? With
Mm-hmm.
submission to His will for our lives. Then, when we recognize it, then He will partner with us so that we can become everything He's called us to be, which is a good thing. Love to hear that about the younger generation. So we're wrapping up this year actually within the next couple months, and like you said, there's a lot of elections that are happening in the next couple of weeks all across America that are important. But I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on, as we are kind of rolling into the end of the 2025, what are some main things that you see that you guys are really focusing in on as you kind of, like I said, wrapping up this year and looking into 2026? What are some of those things that are of utmost importance to the Family Policy Alliance?
Yeah, great question. I think there are three big ones, which are the elections at time of recording. That's next week. We're going to recap those next week after they're done. So I can talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the three big ones are the election, the state legislative sessions starting in January. So usually in January every year is where every state's state government convenes as legislators to argue about bills, to pass some, and then see if the governor of that state will sign them into law. That's the busiest time of the year for us at FPA, because we're engaged in all 50 states trying to support our state allies on the ground in passing laws that reflect God's design for the family and biblical values, and stopping laws that don't reflect that represent threats to God and His church and the family. And then there are several Supreme Court cases that are really important this year. Last year was a banner, historic year for the Supreme Court and for biblical values. And not to toot our horn, but for FPA too, we got some serious vindication at the court last year. We're going to see some really serious cases this year too. In fact, some have already done their oral arguments for this term, and the court will rule on those in the spring, probably April to May. So, just very briefly on each one, the elections are obviously big. These are what are called off-year elections, because if you've noticed, it's an even number year, right? It's 2025. So most states do not have elections this year. There are some very old-fashioned states, including ours, Mark, that are 400 years old, and do what's called off-year elections, where they have elections not just on the years the rest of the country has them, but also on even number of years. I'm sorry, odd number of years, including the highest office in our state, which is the governorship. So we have that, and New Jersey has that, and then New York City also has their mayor. I mentioned that earlier. I think that's a choice of lesser evils in New York. If one candidate's palling around and jihadists, that should be enough for Christians to at least not vote for that person. So I think I've done my job with that one. In New Jersey, the main election is a gubernatorial one between Republican Jack Ciattarelli and the Democrat Mikey Sherrill. Um, I think biblical values there says you have to vote for Jack Ciattarelli if you're in New Jersey, just because he's pro-life, he's pro-family, and New Jersey, at least the biggest issue area that we've worked on there is problems with their education system. So not only is their education not system pretty much failing kids. They don't have high literacy rates or high academic success rates, but it's also pushing very anti-Christian ideology among the kids, mostly the LGBT ideology and a specific affirmation of that ideology, which I think most Christians, as Pastor Steve and I discussed at church a couple weeks ago, Mark, is most Christians are just happy to live and let live. The thing about the devil is he's not. He's coming for you and your kids one way or another. And one of the ways that primarily looks like in today's world is when academic institutions are captured by people who are not Christians. They start pushing unbiblical ideology among children in their very formative years. New Jersey's really dealing with that. Jack Ciattarelli simply says schools should be about learning for kids, not about pushing alternative lifestyles that don't honor God. So I think the choice there is clear. And then in New Jersey, I'm sorry, here in Virginia, we have our governor's elections as well. The Republican candidate is Winsome Earl-Sears, our current lieutenant governor, and the Democrat candidate is a Democrat member of Congress named Abigail Spanberger. But we have other elections in Virginia as well. Both of our state houses are up for grabs. That's the state Senate and the state House of Representatives here, or the state delegates. Controls of both those legislative bodies are up for grabs because of how many seats are up for election. And then our Attorney General election is this year as well. So the incumbent is Attorney General Jason Miyares. He's the current Attorney General, Republican candidate. He's the only of the three, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general. He's the only one that can run for a second consecutive term by Virginia law. So he's back on the ballot. And his opponent is another Democrat representative at the Virginia State House named Jay Jones. For people who are unaware, if you've missed the national news, and I think you could have missed it because of how little a lot of news stations covered it, there's been a big scandal here in Virginia, some texts that Jay Jones had sent to another delegate in Virginia where he expressed explicit intention to kill the former Republican Speaker of the House, who was a Republican, and not just to kill him, but to kill his kids in his arms. Talks about shooting them in the text messages. Very, very vile, despicable stuff. And we mentioned earlier about this incentive structure now towards political violence. Like, this is how you get there. And in one of the texts even explicitly says people don't move on policy until they feel personal pain. This is the ethos that's unfortunately governing the Democrat Party right now. So I think that makes clear you can't vote for Jay Jones as Attorney General as a person of faith. I think because imagine that person who's so flippant about violence towards people who just disagree with him on policy in charge of all of our law enforcement apparatus in Virginia. It's not a very appetizing prospect. Abigail Spanberger has not pulled her endorsement of Jay Jones as a governing candidate. And because we're in this very tense time of political violence and fraudness, I don't think that should be tolerated up and down the ballot. So if whichever candidates are not disavowing Jay Jones, I think you're equally unfit for office. So I think that's pretty clear line for Christians. But if that's not enough for you, Abigail Spanberger's other positions are that boys should be allowed to use girls' changing rooms and locker rooms, which presents a very clear safety issue. She bases this on the idea of a transgender identity, which we could talk about more in depth if you want, but that's her position on it, which is all the more terrifying, I think, coming from her because she has two school-age daughters. So she's basically saying, to support this political notion of mine, my daughter should be in danger. And we're coming off of numerous incidents of assaults from boys on girls in girls' changing rooms and restrooms in Northern Virginia school districts like Loudoun County and Fairfax. So those are the elections going on right now. We'll have those results next week because early voting is opening. Just very briefly, a lot of these issue areas will be dealt with in the state legislators next year. FPA's highest priorities are going to be restoring parental rights, specifically in the digital age, because right now the internet and devices and app stores are the Wild West for kids. That's really what I'm focusing on. Like we're going to work on our whole issue portfolio, but internet safety will be a big one, specifically in pushing what we call App Store Accountability Acts. These are bills that restore control over kids' internet and app usage to parents and prevent big tech companies from contracting with kids to download apps. So we'll be pushing that. You can follow us on social media for updates on it. I think about 30 states are going to look into that legislation, which will be huge. And then there are just two major Supreme Court cases I'll mention. One is we just argued last week was called, or 2 weeks ago, it's called Childs versus Salazar. This is a case about 20 states have laws that prevent counselors from counseling children who have unwanted feelings of a sexual attraction to the opposite sex and want to go through counseling to quell those feelings and live more in comfort with who they are. Um, these states have passed laws saying counselors can't counsel them in that direction. So a Christian counselor sued state of Colorado over their law, and their case was heard at the court last week. And we're really hoping that the court rules the right way and restores freedom of religion and freedom of speech to these mental health counselors so they can help their clients get the help that they want. Um, and then finally, there'll be two cases. One is BPJ versus West Virginia, and the other is Little v. Hecox. They deal with the same issue. Basically, they're the first challenges to about 25 states have passed laws saying girls' sports are just for biological girls. And so these cases are challenging those. They're brought by male athletes who think they're girls, and they want to see these laws overturned. That's a seminal issue area for FPA. Our Save Girls Sports campaign has gotten 25 states to pass laws like this. So that case will be argued probably in January, and then the court will again also rule on it April to June. So those are really critical cases for Christians to be thinking about. We think, and we'll be messaging on them throughout the year.
I got
Yeah,
one
that.
quick comment.
Yeah, go.
I have to sneak in really quickly because everything that I'm hearing is one of my frustrations that I've seen. If there's not something like this out here, I wish that it would. Maybe you guys could partner with somebody to develop it, but in an app that actually lets people dumbs down what's actually going on wherever you live. Because another thing is one of my soapboxes. There's a lot of stuff that different people that are in office, they know how much action there is going to be on a specific thing that they put out there. And so they'll put something out there, hardly anybody knows about it. They get however many votes that they get, and then it passes. Then it affects all of us, and we're like, what happened? Like that would just be great, so I can know what's going on. I mean, I'm gonna research it because I'm a nerd. I pay attention to everything. But for most people, they just want to live life, and they don't even know how any of this stuff is impacting us. I didn't know 1% of what you said is going on, but I know it's going on, right?
Yeah.
So that's just a
Well,
comment.
if you were the devil, you'd want to keep the people of God uninformed, right, Dr. J?
Right, exactly.
If people like you guys who are smart, engaged people care about this stuff, if you didn't know parts of what I said, that tells you how effective the devil has gotten at this, and you're not to blame for that. Nobody is. It's just that this is how institutional control and messaging works in today's world, particularly with things like social media. Is you know at the end of the day, we all know all we have is a hallelujah. God's the one who orchestrates any of our successes, any of our failures, and takes care of us. But he's also, as our pastor said last week, he's looking for hearts to strengthen, going around for that. So that's why we work so hard with our practical tools to help people stay informed. And I mentioned some of them earlier. I did just put some links into the chat here for people who are interested. The first one is the link to all of our state groups. They are the best for staying informed in how these things affect you as they happen. So, Dr. J, your example is perfect. That's what a state FPC is there to do in part. I think of, for example, my friends who work for California Family Council, the one in the California, in the Golden State out in California. Obviously, a lot to keep them busy out there. They've done a great job informing through their social media their followers and supporters in California on the bills that Governor Newsom signed over the last few weeks that impact them, including one that, unfortunately, I believe is the end of parental rights in California. So people can follow them to stay informed on what they can do about it. Follow your state group or any of the others. I also put Christians Engaged in there as one. That's our sister ministry here at FPA, who work very hard to equip Christians on how to really get involved and make their voice heard. Then the other one I'll just do a shameless pitch for is my own weekly podcast, which is called House to Home, which you can find on FPA's landing page, on our podcast page. We're on Spotify, Apple Pods, and YouTube. New episode every Wednesday morning. I think next Wednesday we're probably going to go live to do an election recap. Either way, it'll be an election recap. But that's what we're here for, is to take what's going on at the houses of government and into your home so that you are prepared to just, if you're a parent, just talk about it with your kids. And if you're not, just to engage on this for the parents and families that you do care about in your life. So we're not the only ones. There's a huge ecosystem out there of Christian ministries who are called by God to engage in this and to represent Christians in the halls of power. These are just the ones I work with, and of course personally endorse and think are the best at it.
Yeah, amazing. As Luke mentioned in the chat there, we're gonna have to have you back on. we've been able to touch on a few things, and you have just a wealth of information that is, helpful and inspiring and challenging, all those things. And I think you kind of addressed a little bit Anna's question about California, what's going on there. So definitely
A
check
lot
that
going
out.
on there. Yeah,
Yeah,
your governor's going to run for president, just so you know. And I don't think he's going to be the nominee, but he is definitely planning on running.
yeah, yeah. I think people have been thinking that might be the case for a while now with Governor Newsom. But yeah, one of the things that keeps popping into my heart as you've been speaking, and it's just something that I think I've mentioned here on the Corral Call, but before, and it was one of the speakers from our conference at church, Joseph, talked about things are more spiritual than you think. And that's what's really resonated in my heart. Like these are things that you guys are actively doing and practical, like everyday stuff that you can do to engage. But it does start with that prayer element. Like we need to be engaged in praying for our leaders, our governments, and all that, because that matters, right? It's not just there's an actual spiritual force that coming against each other, right? Two forces. And for whatever reason, God chose prayer to be one of the primary ways that those the force of good, God's force, is going to overtake the enemy. And so, as much as we need people, boots on the ground in it, if we don't have any other role to play, we definitely have a role to pray. And I didn't mean to rhyme, but I just did.
You're freestylist, Mark. I love it. And I'll just agree with you there very quickly. Is that your prayers make so much more of a difference than you can possibly imagine. I joined this FPA in 2021. The next year we saw Roe versus Wade overturned at the Supreme Court, and that was a multi-generational, 60-year effort to overturn an incorrect Supreme Court decision that invented a right to an abortion for everybody in our country, for every woman in our country, and that should never have happened, but it was so deeply entrenched. It's such a core principle for people who oppose God and his values that that's how long it took. There's no way that happened except through prayer. Millions of Christians faithfully praying that one day we would see this, and then specifically praying when the case came up, praying for the advocates, praying for the Supreme Court justices and their clerks, praying for the pro life movement. There's no way we achieve great victories like that except through prayer. That's just one example. I could name numerous ones. But your prayers, like you said, Mark, everything is more spiritual than you think. And this is from someone who's not one to over spiritualize things. Like just because I hit some traffic every day doesn't mean it's spiritual warfare from the devil. But this stuff that we're talking about most definitely is. The devil hates goodness. He hates the family. He hates God's design. And that's why you're seeing this rise of so many forces and ideas that oppose this today. It is spiritual warfare, and and we all need your prayers for it. We all covet your prayers for it.
Yeah, Joseph, we're so thankful that you and your team are out there and getting it done, making the information available, working on policy, all of the roles that you guys are involved in. We're just super grateful. If you could just talk a little bit about, let people know about what you're doing this evening. Is that something that people could tune into? And I believe it's here at Old Dominion University. Is that correct?
Yes, so the Turning Point chapter at Old Dominion University, the big university here in Virginia Beach, really honored me with this invitation to do an open forum style event tonight for a couple hours on their campus. So I'm very excited to do that. I don't think they have the capability to do any kind of live broadcast of it at the moment. I've promised to actually work with them to investigate that when I get there early tonight. So that may happen. If it does happen, the surest way you can learn about it would be to follow the Turning Point USA ODU chapter on Instagram. I think it's, give me a second, I'll pull up the handle for it.
Yeah.
Um, but you could also follow us, which is at family_policy. We might be able to broadcast it as well, but it'll most likely come from Turning Point ODU. So let me make sure I get that for you here. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the Instagram handle is TPUSA ODU with the letters ODU.
Great.
Um, so if we're able to broadcast live, it'll probably come from them. If not, we're trying to get some kind of media out of the event. So just a great honor to be asked to do that in the wake of what happened with Charlie and his family. And we all feel like we're in it together now. We're all stewards of his legacy. So that's what I'm trying to honor tonight.
Excellent. Well, it's a proud moment for the body of Wave Church as well to support you as you go and
Thank you.
represent. So that is great. I'm loving that you're able to do that. So yeah, check out the Instagram TPUSAODU for those that are interested in that. And of course, you have your other websites that we mentioned earlier. Make sure you guys go check those out: familypolicyalliance.com and then christiansengaged.org. Those are all great resources for everyone. And Joseph, as we wrap our time today, any final words you'd like to leave us with?
Just want to thank people who came tune in or are going to watch this later. Just your interest in this is and your care for it, your heart for families and for the people of God, and to follow His calling on your life is huge. This is a world that seems to hate God so much, but there are much more of us out there who love God and want to do what He's calling us to do. So, Mark, you and Dr. J are doing incredible work to facilitate that, to try to make these connections and to encourage these people. I just want to add a layer of encouragement. Thank you for your prayers, your concern for this. America needs you. I think the Western world needs you, and God and His people need you. The family needs you. So thank you. Please continue to get engaged and pray for us. It was an honor to really come on and speak about all this with y'all.
Yes, thank you so much, Joseph. And for everybody else that's part of the Corral Call or watching this later, thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for upcoming Corral Calls and 2000 Cubit Rule podcasts with a lot of great things coming your way. And so until then, be blessed.
Thank you, Mark and Dr. J. I have to hop off for another call, but just want to tell you what an honor it was to be on here. Sorry for how